Every ending is a beautiful neon requiem, a glowing tribute to the journey we have shared and the lessons we've learned together. Join us as we close this chapter with style and prepare for a brand new beginning. Hit subscribe now and witness the beauty of resolution. My grandson's baseball glove was sitting on the front porch when I pulled into the driveway, just lying there in the dirt, laces frayed, like someone had tossed it out without a second thought. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and something in my chest went very still. I knocked on the door. My daughter-in-law answered. She looked at me the way she always did, like I was a package she hadn't ordered and couldn't return. "He's not here," she said. "I can see my son's truck in the driveway," I said. She stepped back and let me in without another word. "My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working quietly, building something most people never knew about. And I raised my son, Daniel, the best way I knew how, which, I'll admit, wasn't always perfect. His mother passed when he was 9. It was just the two of us for a long time. I wasn't much of a talker. I showed up. I paid the bills. I coached his little league team every spring until he was 12 and decided he was too old for it. I thought that was enough. I was wrong about that. And I've spent years understanding exactly how wrong. Daniel is 34 now. He married a woman named Stephanie 6 years ago. Her father, a man named Roger, owned a chain of auto parts stores across 3 counties in central Ohio. Roger was the kind of man who measured everyone in the room by how much they needed him. He had a handshake that lasted a second too long. The kind that tells you he's deciding something while he's doing it. From the first Sunday dinner I sat through, I understood what Roger was. I just didn't say anything. That was my old habit. Stay quiet. Let things work themselves out. They don't always work themselves out. My grandson's name is Cooper. He was 4 years old the afternoon I picked up that baseball glove off the porch. Sharp little kid, all elbows and questions. The kind of boy who asks why the sky is blue, and then follows it with 6 more questions before you finish answering the first one. I drove out to see him every other Saturday. Sometimes Stephanie would be warm, offer me coffee, let Cooper climb all over me in the living room. Other times, there was a coldness in the house. I could feel the moment I walked in a particular kind of cold that comes from one person deciding the temperature for everyone else. That particular Saturday, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. He had a look on his face I recognized from when he was a teenager, that careful blankness, the face he wore when he was trying not to react to something. His jaw was tight. There was a redness on the left side of his face that hadn't been there the last time I saw him. Roger was standing near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, wide-legged the way men stand when they want to take up more space than they actually occupy. I looked at my son's face. I looked at Roger. "What happened?" I asked. Daniel started to say something, but Roger cut across him. "Family business," Roger said. "Nothing that concerns you." Stephanie was standing in the doorway to the hallway. She said, "Not to me, not to Daniel, but more to the room in general. Dad was just making a point. Daniel needs to hear certain things." I said, "Where's Cooper?" "He's in his room," Daniel said quietly. "He's fine." I set the baseball glove down on the kitchen table. I looked at my son's face again. The redness, the tight jaw, the way he wasn't quite meeting my eyes. I said, "Daniel, did he put his hands on you?" The silence that followed answered me before anyone spoke. Roger uncrossed his arms and took a half step forward. "I'm going to ask you to watch your tone in my daughter's house. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment, because it matters to the rest of this story. I didn't feel rage. I've seen rage in people. The hot kind that makes them stupid and loud. What I felt was something much colder and much more deliberate. It was the feeling of a door closing on one chapter and another one opening. Quietly, without drama. I said, "I'll be right back." I walked out to the front porch. I stood in the afternoon light for a moment. Then I took out my phone and made a call. The person I called was a man named Arthur. Arthur and I had worked together for 22 years. He was meticulous,
careful, and he had never once lost a case that deserved to be won. I told him what I had seen. I told him what I suspected. I told him what I needed. Arthur said, "Give me until Monday." I went back inside. I picked up the baseball glove from the table. I told Daniel I'd see him soon. I didn't look at Roger when I left. Now, I should explain something, the thing that is probably already occurring to some of you. My son didn't fully know what I did for a living. That sounds strange, I understand. Let me explain it properly, because this detail matters, and I don't want anyone to think I was being deceptive with my own child. When Daniel was growing up, I told him I worked in consulting. That was partly true and partly the only word I had that covered everything without opening doors. I wasn't ready to walk through with a 9-year-old, then a 12-year-old, then a teenager. What I actually did and had done since I was 31 years old was work as a licensed private investigator, and then, for the last 18 years, as the owner of a firm that handled civil litigation support, asset investigations, and corporate due diligence for law firms across 4 states. I had a staff of 11 people. I had contracts with 3 of the largest law offices in Columbus. I had spent decades learning exactly how to find what people tried to hide. I never told Daniel because, honestly, I didn't think it would come up. He'd gone into construction management. Our lives ran parallel but didn't overlap professionally. He never asked in any direct way, and I, true to my old habit, never volunteered more than was necessary. I should have told him. I know that now. It would have changed a great deal about how the next 6 years of his marriage unfolded, because here is what Arthur and I found out about Roger over the following 2 weeks. Roger's auto parts chain, which appeared to be a solid regional business generating somewhere in the range of $4 million annually across his 7 locations, was significantly less solid than it appeared. Roger had, over the course of about 8 years, developed a practice of running a portion of his inventory through a secondary set of books. It wasn't complex, it rarely is. When someone has been doing it long enough to get comfortable, parts purchased in bulk were logged at inflated costs, the difference pocketed in cash through a supplier relationship Roger had with a cousin who existed largely on paper. The IRS had not yet noticed. His business partners, he had 2 silent partners in the original incorporation, had not yet noticed. His daughter had certainly not noticed. There was more. Roger had a judgment against him from a civil suit in 2019 that he had satisfied on paper, but not in full. The plaintiff, a former employee, had accepted a partial settlement after Roger's attorney implied, in terms that Arthur found well documented, that things could become unpleasant for the plaintiff's family if they pressed further. That former employee had been trying, quietly, to find someone to help them revisit the matter for 3 years. And there was the matter of Daniel's house, the house where my son lived with Stephanie and Cooper. Roger had made the down payment as a wedding gift. What Daniel didn't know, what was buried in the original loan documentation in a subordinate clause that most people would sign past without reading, was that Roger had structured his contribution as a private loan, not a gift. A loan with a demand clause that allowed Roger to call it due in full with 60 days' notice, at any time, for any reason. That was the leash. That was how Roger walked into his daughter's house whenever he felt like it, and spoke to my son in whatever tone he chose. That was the mechanism. Daniel didn't know he was wearing a collar. I sat with all of this for 3 days before I called Daniel. I asked him to meet me for coffee. He came to the diner near my house, the one we'd been going to since he was a teenager. He sat across from me in the same booth we always used, and I put a folder on the table between us. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. "Dad," he said. "What is this?" I said. "I owe you a longer conversation about what I actually do for a living, but that's going to have to come second, because what's in that folder is more urgent." He opened it slowly. I watched my son's face as he read. I have watched a lot of people read difficult information over the years. Most of them go through the same sequence. First confusion, then the slow recalibration as the meaning settles in, then something harder to name, the particular expression of someone who is reassembling a picture they thought they already understood. Daniel got to the section about the loan. He stopped. He read it again. He set the papers down flat on the table with both hands. The way you put something down when you need a moment, before you can pick it back up. He can take the house, he said. It wasn't a question. With 60 days' notice, I said. Yes. Does Stephanie know? I don't know, I said. I don't think it matters right now. He was quiet for a while. The waitress refilled our coffee. Outside, a truck pulled through the intersection. Dad, he said finally, who are you? I smiled at that. I told him. All of it. The firm, the work, Arthur, the contracts, all of it I laid out. 31 years of a life I'd kept at arm's length from him, and I watched him listen with the focused expression of someone who is making adjustments to a very long equation. When I finished, he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I thought keeping it separate was protecting you." I was wrong. He nodded slowly. He drank his coffee. Then he picked up the folder again. "What do I do with this?" he asked. I said, "That depends on what you want the next part of your life to look like." What followed was not quick, and it was not clean. And I want to be honest about that because these things never are. Daniel went home and said nothing for several days. He consulted a family attorney, one I recommended, not one Roger had any connection to. He got an independent reading of the loan documentation. The attorney confirmed everything Arthur had found and added one additional observation. The demand clause, while legal, had been deliberately obscured in the original paperwork in a way that a court might find actionable as a disclosure violation, depending on how Roger's attorney had characterized the payment to the title company. The family attorney also quietly contacted a colleague who specialized in tax matters, who looked at the secondary books documentation we'd compiled and made a phone call to a contact at the state level. Roger did not know any of this was happening. He continued, during this period, to come and go from Daniel and Stephanie's house as he pleased. He made a comment to my son at a family dinner in front of Stephanie and Cooper about the quality of Daniel's work ethic. Cooper was sitting 3 feet away eating a plate of macaroni. Daniel said nothing. He was being patient, which is harder than people think. I want to tell you about the morning the letter arrived at Roger's house, because Daniel told me about it afterward, and I've thought about it many times since. It was a Tuesday. Roger received a formal notice from the Ohio Department of Taxation, a certified letter requiring a response within 30 days regarding discrepancies identified in business tax filings for 3 of his store locations over a period of 6 years. On the same morning, he received a letter from the 2 silent partners in his original incorporation, represented by an attorney, requesting an emergency audit of company accounts under the terms of the partnership agreement. On Wednesday, Daniel called Roger and asked to meet. They met at Roger's office. At a conference table Roger had probably used for 30 years to make other people feel small. Daniel brought his attorney. Roger had not yet retained new counsel. His usual attorney had called that morning and withdrawn from the representation, citing a conflict of interest. Daniel put a document on the table. It was a formal demand for the loan documentation to be amended, restating Roger's original payment as the gift it had been represented as verbally at the time of the wedding. In exchange, Daniel's attorney outlined certain information that would not be escalated to additional parties. Roger looked at the document. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the attorney. He said, "Your father is behind this." Daniel said, "My father found information. What you did with it is what got you here." Roger signed the document. He didn't do it gracefully. There was nothing graceful about it. He signed it the way a man signs something when he finally understands that the room he thought he controlled has belonged to someone else the entire time. What happened after that was gradual, the way most real things are. Stephanie was angry first at Daniel, then, once she understood the full picture, at her father. That process took months. There were weeks when Daniel slept on my couch and Cooper came over on Saturdays and we threw a baseball in the backyard. The same backyard where I'd taught Daniel to throw 30 years ago. The glove I'd picked up off the porch sat on the shelf in my garage. I kept it there on purpose. Stephanie and Daniel went to counseling. I won't tell you it was easy, or that everything healed cleanly. Because I don't believe in telling stories that way. What I'll tell you is that the last time I saw them together, they were sitting at my kitchen table. The three of them, Daniel, Stephanie, and Cooper, eating Sunday dinner, and there was an ease in the room that hadn't been there before. A lightness, the kind that comes when a weight has been removed, that everyone had been pretending wasn't there. Roger's tax situation was resolved with a significant penalty and a structured repayment agreement. His business partners bought out his share of the incorporation under terms he was not in a position to negotiate favorably. He still has 2 store locations. He runs them quietly. He does not come to Sunday dinners anymore. Cooper is 6 now. He has a new baseball glove, a proper one, sized for a first grader. I take him to games when I can. He's not particularly skilled yet. He's got my son's instinct for the sport, but his mother's relationship with patience, which means he wants to hit home runs before he's learned to bunt. I tell him that's fine. You learn the small things first. The rest comes. A few months ago, Daniel and I were driving back from one of Cooper's games, just the 2 of us, his son asleep in the back seat, the way he used to fall asleep on car rides when he was small. We were quiet for a while. The comfortable kind. Then Daniel said, "I've been thinking about what you said, that you were wrong not to tell me." I said, "I was." He looked out the window. "I think I understand why you did it, though. You thought if I didn't know, I couldn't be pulled into it, couldn't be used against you. I thought about that." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just didn't know how to talk to you about it. Some things are easier to do than explain." He nodded slowly. "Still," he said, "next time something's going on, I'd rather know." I said, "There won't be a next time. Not like that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How did you know? When you walked into that kitchen and saw my face, how did you know it was bad enough to do something?" I thought about the baseball glove in the dirt on the porch. I thought about the way silence compounds, year after year, until it becomes a kind of structure that other people can live inside and use against you. "Because I recognized the look on your face," I said. "It was the same look you had the night your mother went to the hospital, and nobody told you yet what was happening. You knew something was wrong, but you were waiting for someone to say it was okay." He didn't say anything for a while after that. "I'm sorry it took me this long," I said. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment. The brief, uncomplicated way men who love each other express it when the right words are too large to carry. "You showed up," he said. That's what mattered. The sun was going down over the highway. Cooper was still asleep in the back, breathing evenly. One hand curled under his chin. I drove us home.